Hey, readers, this is Stephen Lane, hoping you have a great time at the National Book Festival. As part of the festival, I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to share a little background with you on one of my picture books, Love the Baby. To do that, I need to share my screen, a picture of my daughter, Victoria. This picture was taken on the evening that Victoria's mom and dad, that's me and my wife, sat down with her to explain that a new baby was coming to our house. You can see from the photograph, she was not too excited. In fact, she said very loudly and clearly, "I am the baby in the Lane house." And despite our best efforts to get her excited, she was not happy. And then, when the new baby came, he was one of those really energetic, excited babies all the time, always happy and getting a lot of attention. And she was even less thrilled. In fact, the first time they were ever alone together in a room, and this was before he could stand up on his own, he was playing inside this little baby saucer, sitting in the pouch and playing with his toys. And my wife called me into the dining room to help her for a minute. I walked just around the corner, and suddenly we heard a racing into the room, and the baby saucer with the baby in it was completely upside down. And standing nearby was a little sister who proclaimed quite loudly, "He just fell." Well, of course, we knew he didn't just fall. He had a whole lot of help. And after we got him out and situated and had a talk with Victoria, I took a pad of paper and a pen and decided I had to write a story about how it feels sometimes when the new baby comes to your house, a story I knew would really resonate with readers. I had no idea how successful that story would become. But for my own four children, it certainly became a favorite, as well as for kids around the world. It led to an entire series of books, and fortunately, Jackson and Victoria learned to get along very well and have become good friends over the years.
The idea for Grace and Box came when it was my daughter's first birthday, and she had gotten some toys, but she wasn't playing with the toys. She was playing with the box that the toys came in instead. And watching that just reminded me of my own childhood. I loved playing with boxes when I was little. My sister and I would make houses and forts together. And so this idea for Grace and Box started to come that felt really timeless and relatable, and I hoped could inspire creativity and imagination for kids.
Well, as a Minnesotan, I would say I have a love-hate relationship with snow, as I think most of us probably do. By the time April rolls around, we're done with it. I had the idea for so much snow in February when I knew that there was still a couple months of winter left, but I wanted to sort of portray the beauty and awe that a late season snowstorm brings, as well as the relief that we feel with the melting and the signs of spring as they arrive. I think we all appreciate spring so much more because of our harsh winters. And then the ending of my book, without giving any spoilers, is very relatable to Minnesotans and anyone who lives through a long winter.
It was a collection of inspirations, if you will. In terms of the Michigan tie, I had the honor of attending Michigan Law School when I was in my 20s and participating myself as someone who was involved in planning and a little bit ticket sales for the powwow, the Dance for Mother Earth powwow, which takes place annually in Ann Arbor. And I had been thinking about a way to introduce not only the quality, but also the diversity within the Native American creative children's book community. Having a powwow story, particularly in intertribal, seemed like the ideal scenario. It's the kind of event that would pull people from across the continent, including our friends north of the Medicine Line, and also a college town setting intrinsically brings in folks likewise from a diverse range of geographic locations. So it was a place that could plausibly host folks who were Navajo traders, who were Cree dancers, who were Choctaw elders out on a trip of fun under the supervision of a nefarious 12-year-old. So it gave plenty of room for, humor, for reunion, for new friendships, for celebration of family, for honoring veterans, for so much of what we do, not to mention, of course, food, dancing, music, which in many ways always transit first cross-culturally. So those two ideas, the idea of wanting an intertribal story setting, my own tie to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and my connection to Ann Arbor powwow sort of came together and allowed me to plausibly assemble a cast of intertribal authors to tell stories of their heart.
I worked at the University of Nebraska State Museum for a couple of years. That's the state's natural history museum. And I was part of an exhibit team working to create exhibits about Nebraska through time. I'm not originally from Nebraska, so I learned a lot about the state when I was working at the museum. And it was while I was there that I really learned about this amazing place in northern Nebraska called Ashfall State Park. And Ashfall is one of the premier paleontology sites in the world, located right here in Nebraska. And I had been to Ashfall, but I didn't really understand what Ashfall told us about Nebraska's past until I was working at the museum and really got to know the paleontologists who'd worked there. And it was then that I had this moment of realization that rhinos used to be running around in this place where I'm sitting right now. They were running around in my backyard. There were elephants, camels, all kinds of horses. It really looked a lot like what modern day Africa looks like. And once I had that realization, that was when I knew I had to write a book about it.
I first learned about Emma Gatewood when I was hiking with my family in an area of Ohio called the Hocking Hills, which is a very beautiful place for hiking. And we walked past a rock with a plaque on it, and the plaque said, "You're on the Grandma Gatewood Trail." And then there was a few more sentences. It told the who, Emma Gatewood, and the what. She was the first woman to solo hike the Appalachian Trail in one through hike. And it told the when, but it's just a plaque, and that's all it can say. So the curious mind wants to know more. We got home, I started Googling, I started reading all the articles I could find about Emma Gatewood. And that's when I got to the how and the why. Like, how did she do this at age 67? And why would a 67-year-old in the 1950s take off on a 2,000-mile hike alone when no woman had done it solo in a through hike before? So what I thought was going to be the most inspirational was her completion, but was actually the most inspirational. And I think the lesson that I really wanted to share with young readers is the perseverance, because in 1954, she attempted and failed. She was met with a search party. They told her, go home. And that could have been the end of her story, in which case this story would have never been written. And so that was my inspiration for sharing her story.
I wanted to pay homage to some of the great playground legends from around the world, around the country, that we hear about, but there's no real video of them. As a kid growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, being able to travel around on my bike and finding really great players in different playgrounds around the city was also kind of the inspiration. But there's a message, and the message is no matter how great a player you might be, there is no like I in team, and that these great players like LeBron or Michael Jordan or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar win because they are able to come together with their teammates. And that's the message more than anything.
Now, the theme of the National Book Festival this year is Everyone Has a Story. I love that theme because it ties in so well with the most common question that authors are asked, which is constantly, where do you get your ideas? And the truth is, for many of us, ideas come from daily living, from things that happen in our lives, from research we do about the lives and experiences of others. And all of that really reinforces this theme. Everyone has a story. We sometimes think that the stories of our lives aren't that interesting. But the example I just gave you of something very routine that happened in my own house, lots of kids have trouble when a new baby comes to the house. It's very normal. We hear about it all the time. But when you take those experiences that resonate with others and write them down, you often get a book that people really enjoy.
I think that hearing people's stories is so important. It helps connect us, it builds empathy, it helps us see things a different way. And I hope that this theme kind of inspires people to realize that they have a story, that it's valuable, and that the world needs to hear it.
I think everyone has infinite number of stories within them. If you really, think about our lives are a compilation of stories, both short and long. And one of the things I love most about writing for children is that we get to tell stories that we hope resonate with little people who are going through that very exciting growth period in their lives, where every day they're just learning so many new things and developing that sense of self. And so I hope that my stories get to be a part of that.
I've often said that any child can be a hero that everybody cheers. And when I say that, I'm talking about representation. For so many of us growing up, we didn't see ourselves in the pages of books. I became a reader anyway, in large part because I was a particularly imaginative child. And so I would simply assign native identity to a random character. And that was who they were going to be. And that made me feel included in the circle of readers. And in fact, it carried on to all of my interactions with story. When I saw Star Wars as an elementary school child, I decided Princess Leia was clearly indigenous. I mean, she had the braids, she was fighting the power, she had a lot of attitude. That looked like a native auntie to me. So, we long for this. We want it in our narratives. And it was an opportunity here to really showcase that. The wonderful thing about short stories is that it wasn't a single hero narrative. It really is a story of community rising and celebrating that every young hero is, in fact, the protagonist of their own life story.
So everyone has a story. To me, I guess it means that our stories are our experiences, and I think our experiences make us who we are. So by looking at our experiences and our stories, that really kind of helps us understand who we are and how we fit in the world.
Is that I've never met anybody who doesn't have a story, and all you have to do is turn on the news and you are inundated with this more stories than anybody will be able to write ever, including the people who are living them. So that's the first part of the question. I think that's what the theme means to me. There's no end to them. And I know that as a child, I was addicted to stories from the get-go. I mean, what is more exciting than the words "once upon a time," which suspends time so that you can get to the experiences. And if you realize that it's our life experience as human beings that are the foundation of all our stories and myths and whatever they are, you know that it's endless. And the people who say, "Oh, I don't have anything to say," they're too busy doing other things with their lives because, and I also think that for me, one of the, I was read to by my Danish grandmother who translated Norwegian stories and Danish stories into English. So that my first sense of English was through a European speaking person. But honestly, all I can say is that I've never met anybody who doesn't have a story. And this particular story that Michelle found grabbed me as soon as I heard it when I heard from the editor at OU Press, and she asked if I was interested, and I said, oh my gosh.
So with the theme being, which I'm really excited about it, everybody has a story. It's something that I teach all the time as a mentor. It's like, as an artist, you have to find your voice, and nobody has exactly the same experience as you. And so we all have a story. And so it's so important that you share that story, because you may find a commonality in your experience, but you may be able to learn something from a different interpretation of a story that might be similar to yours.
And the one that comes to mind is Carolyn Bailey's Miss Hickory. It's not a magical book in terms of magic, but it's a magical book in my heart. It is a fantasy story that my first grade teacher read to us. It's the main book that I remember her reading throughout first grade. We would rush over to the rug every day, and I fell in love with story in first grade. I fell in love with Miss Porter's bringing story into my heart, and I think that resonated with me throughout my life, the intimate act of being read to, of spending time with story. And so the idea then that I could create story and share it with others has been a real joy.
When I do author visits to schools, I frequently get asked what was my favorite picture book as a kid. And I always say, I Can't, Said the Ant. I love that book. It rhymes, it's a little bit silly, it has some really unique illustrations. And when I think back on my childhood and reading stories with my mom, that book is always there in my memory. So I think it really represents that time of connection and togetherness when you're reading books together.
James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. My second grade teacher, Mr. Lehman, read that out loud to our class. And my favorite part of the day was sitting on the carpet and listening to him read to us. It's such a fantastical story too. I think that's part of what just kept us all enthralled, was you just couldn't guess where that story was going next. So from a second grader's perspective, it was just it was a great part of my day, that's for sure. And there's something so special about being read to, and also sharing stories, experiencing a story with other people, whether it be just, in that case, it was the entire class, but sometimes it's, especially with picture books, it's a parent and a child, or a caregiver and a child. So I just love that memory of that book being read to me in second grade, and just really made an impression for sure.
When I was a young reader, my heart book, the one that I read over and over again, was Witch from Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear. It came out a few years ahead of me. It was in 1958. And looking back on it, I do see flaws, particularly in some of Kit's attitudes. Although they were reflective of the time, it's still hard for me as a modern person to fully accept that. Meanwhile, there were also qualities in the book that really resonated with me. Kit was a child of the islands who had been orphaned and shipped over to live with her Puritan aunt and uncle in a much more restrictive society, both in terms of what women did and in terms of accepting folks who were considered outsiders. She befriends an elder woman who is distanced from the rest of the community, as well as a young Black girl. And together they learn to read and they celebrate story. She's ultimately tried as a witch, which was, one of the true tragedies of the era and of American history. And at the same time, I remember as a child thinking that I was a bit outspoken too, and I probably would have been tried as a witch in Puritan New England. And so I felt that sense of not belonging, but also knowing how important it was to raise your voice when it was truly necessary, both for yourself and for those you cared about.
Yeah.
I would have to say A Wrinkle in Time was probably the big one. And I've always been kind of a science geek. I still am to this day. And it was this the first time I'd ever seen someone talk about really complicated scientific concepts in a way that I could understand as a kid. And that to me was just super interesting and super cool and really got my mind kind of working. And I think that actually has a lot to do with why I'm a science writer for kids today. I have yet to actually write and publish a fictional story that has to do with science, but I'm all about writing about science for kids in ways that they can understand and get excited about it.
I could not narrow it down to a book, but rather a category, a genre, because I was so drawn to biographies. And I can still remember in my elementary school class in the library exactly which shelf had all the bees on the spine. And I just went through them. I don't think alphabetically, but, and at that time, they were they were Betsy Ross, Florence Nightingale, significant women in history, most of them, though, filling traditional women's roles, seamstresses, nurses, presidents' wives, teachers. And so I ate through all those biographies as a child. And I think as I look back, that's why I'm so excited to write biographies now, is because I can choose subjects like Emma Gatewood, who did something extraordinary, paved the way for others.
I have two that come to mind immediately. And again, I was brought up by Danish and Norwegian speaking people. Unfortunately, they wanted to keep their language private so it didn't work. We learned to understand it, we just couldn't speak it, but that's beside the point. But I remember this wonderful book called Akhenater and Pelleril, which was the Norwegian translation of a Swedish author illustrator I think her name was Elsa Beskow, Beskow. And this was translated, and her watercolors, for me, stories are visual. I see it all as a movie when I'm listening to a story, and always have. So these beautiful woodland creatures, it's about fairies and elves and natural creatures, but the children in the story, the elves and the fairy children, act like we did, they were like human people, but beautiful, beautiful illustrations of natural nature. And nature was my best friend. I lived out in the country with no way to get to anybody, so I had nobody my age to play with. And definitely no girls. There were lots of boys, but it was the 40s and 50s, so nobody. Girls and boys were very segregated, and unfortunately that stayed that way for a long time. But that was the big one in my childhood, because it also captured me as somebody who wanted to work with books. The other one is Grimm's fairy tales. I had this funny little red book with tiny illustrations in it, and they were so powerful, these black and white and sometimes watercolor illustrations from the various stories. They just took me over, and I went, that's what I want to do. I want to make books.
An important book that has changed my life and has changed the lives of so many that was produced in the 60s is Ezra Jacques, A Snowy Day. What made A Snowy Day so significant and important to me was I recall as a young child of 5 or 6, finally seeing an image of a Black child that looked like me, and a mother who was a little heavier that looked like my mother. And I was able to identify with these characters. Prior to that, a lot of the stories, when representing Black people and Black children in particular, were derogatory. And so A Snowy Day actually influenced even my style of creating today. Textures and patterns and colors, but just a kid having the decision to go out and play on a heavily snowed day. And so I love that. If you look at books like I've done since then, like Rainy Day Rocket Ship has to do with a little child who can't go out and play because it's raining outside. So it's like, use your imagination and have an amazing day. And so those are the kinds of messages I want to produce these days.
Now, I live in the Midwest region of our country, in the state of Illinois. There's a lot of great things about Illinois. But when I was asked to talk about one thing I really loved, I decided to mention something that most people probably wouldn't know to tell you, and that is a small German bakery in Western Springs. It's called Kirschbaum's. It is my absolute happy place. Anytime anyone wants to make me happy, they go to Kirschbaum's. If I want to be really happy, I go to Kirschbaum's. And in fact, as I conclude this recording, I think I'm going to make a little trip to Western Springs to Kirschbaum's. Have a great rest of the festival.
My favorite thing about Indiana would probably be Indiana summers, which I know they're very humid, but I love the summertime. I grew up near the dunes by Lake Michigan, and there was a lake in my hometown. And so I have a lot of memories of being at the beach and being in water. I was always outside, and even now, I love being outside with my kids playing. So we always look forward to the summer.
I have to say, being surrounded by water, which I don't think I realized. I've lived other places and realized that I need to be near water. And I think just as Minnesotans with our 10,000 lakes, we really make the most of those. So in the summers, we're paddleboarding, boating, swimming, fishing, that kind of thing. And then when the lakes freeze over in winter, there's ice skating, hockey, sometimes still fishing for people who are really into it. But yeah, I think my favorite part about Minnesota is just the natural beauty of our state, and just the water everywhere is my favorite thing for sure.
My favorite place was the Arboretum in Ann Arbor. I was a traditional law student, so I came right after my undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Kansas. It was my first time living really far away from home, without family very close by. I'd gone to undergraduate only 45 minutes away, and with one of my very closest cousins. So this was my big adventure, right? I was going to go out into the world and study with sons and daughters of senators and congressmen. And it felt very intimidating for a first generation kid. You know, I was a daughter of a car salesman and a check printer, and no one expected me to do anything like that. You know, maybe someone I married, but certainly not me. And I really felt the pressure at times. I wasn't sure at first if I was smart enough or strong enough to get through it. I'm a very sensitive person, and it's a really tough interpersonal atmosphere. At least it was at first, while everyone was, you know, getting to know each other and posturing a bit, but then we all became people.
Mhm.
And so the Arboretum was a refuge to me. It was an opportunity to reconnect with nature and the creator and hear water run and feel grounded, to know that I belonged here on earth, and that no matter where I went, I was never truly alone. I was part of something bigger.
But because I'm not originally from Nebraska, my main exposure to Nebraska was the interstate that crosses through it, I-80. And from the interstate, you don't see a whole lot other than corn and some soybeans. And, you know, here and there, there's some rivers and some trees, but you just see crops for the most part. And it wasn't until I moved here and started moving out from that very limited perspective of the state that I discovered there's so many really beautiful, amazing natural spaces in this state that I think a lot of people don't realize are here. And so Nebraska is kind of a little gem of a state that a lot of people don't know about.
The first thing I name is the Hocking Hills. Because my daughter was married in Ash Cave, and I hiked all those trails, including the Grandma Gatewood Trail. And it's one of the most beautiful parts of this whole region, with waterfalls. I think there's a place called Cedar Trails or Cedar Falls or something absolutely beautiful, and it's so quiet because nothing is allowed to disturb it. So you're really getting pure nature, absolutely pure nature when you walk down there. And it's so incredible. So I'm with you on the Hocking Hills, number one. Number two, the Dairy Barn Art Center here in Athens, Ohio, which is best known for the Quilt National and the Quilt International shows that go all over the world and happen to be up right now and through September, and show everything from the traditional to the absolutely brand new materials, painting like quilts. They fall in the category of quilts, but they're like, absolutely, you've never seen anything made like them. They use every kind of material. So the director has brought in wonderful people. I have terrific bosses, and I teach painting and drawing all through the year, except in the summer when they have a summer art camp for kids. So winter, spring, and fall, I teach there. My third favorite place is this place that is allowing me to make the Zoom call, the Athens County Public Library, where Michelle and I did our book signing. And I don't know what I would do without this place. I came in here a half hour early and said, Austin, I don't know what to do. I didn't even know how to set this up, even though I had downloaded the program. So I'm able to do this thanks to the Athens County Public Library at Home Street Branch and all the wonderful staff that work here. I depend on this place like more than you could believe. And they're full of wonderful people. So Michelle, you tell us now.
Okay. Well, my favorite thing about my state, Ohio, is the geographic diversity. And we've already touched on that a little bit, but I'll start by telling you that I live in Northwest Ohio, which is completely flat farmland. You can see for miles and miles and miles. And but then if you just travel 3 hours, you're in Erica's part of our state, which we've already talked about, is the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, the Hocking Hills region. You've got valleys, gorges, waterfalls. It seems like you've left the country and you're in another place. But then you go north to the Lake Erie Islands and you've got a whole different vibe up there. So I just love that Ohio encompasses so many different land formations and such different geographical places. You can travel in Ohio and feel like you've really traveled far.
I'm always still impressed when I discovered, long after leaving Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I've been gone for over 30 years now, but that the Summerfest is like the biggest music festival in the world. And to me, that's very impressive. You know, when I was a child growing up, it was like always common for my relatives to come from all over the country to visit Milwaukee so they could go to the breweries and have free samples of all kinds of beers. I've always loved the museum. The Milwaukee Museum is amazing, but the Art Museum and the War Memorial is where I spent all of my time on the lakefront. And you can see there's an ode to that in the book itself. So there's so many things, but there's no, like there are things that are very common about Milwaukee that I love, like the bubbler, that nobody else has a bubbler anywhere in the country that I can find, or anyone knows what a time machine is, or what let me say, it was a bubbler, time machine, and mock chicken legs. And like, so when you're talking to people from around the country, a lot of people don't know what those things are. So they're so based in Milwaukee. And I am fortunate to have been there and being raised there and had that experience.